So you can turn $100 into over $1,000, and it's exponential, but it's exponentially decreasing each time because the amounts get less and less. But over $1,000, all secured by only $100. Sounds legit. The people who take out loans, they owe debt to the bank. The bank technically owns a debt to you, and you probably own a debt to other loans you have. So what does it all do? It accrues interest. So you have $100 real accruing $1,000 of interest. Now riddle me this. If you have, let's just say there's $100 in the whole world, and you get $1,000 of interest. So let's say it's just 1%, that's $10 of interest. At the next cycle you have to pay, you have $100, and assuming you can get it, plus $10. Now you may notice an issue where there's only $100. Where's the other $10 come from? Well, the Federal Reserve, of course. That new money injection becomes the interest of the magnified money previously. The government's best approach is print money. And then when you ask them about economic policy, you get, there's inflation, price controls. Oh my God, like price controls, come on. Do you know what a free market economy is? Like ask Russia how price controls went with communism, and you may notice by the missing millions of Russian citizens who starved, it didn't go well. Price controls don't work. There's no understanding of how money influences people's behavior and how you can go ahead and encourage good debt and economic development. If they could do that, even with this system rotting against us, there might just be hope. And the people at the top, they don't even know that it's broken. They don't know what the economy is. So it's something I've seen it described as a ship of monkeys. It's like when the wind was going in the right direction, the monkeys thought they were sailing the ship. But now that the wind is starting to change and there's rocks ahead, they tried to turn the lever, the print money lever, or the start a war, or use the media. But what's going to happen is they're going to crash into the rocks. If the economy collapses, what are you going to do? So we've really shot ourselves in the foot with epic proportions, and what's going to go down is going to be something told in the horse stories for thousands of years as why you don't go to fiat, and you stay with real money, and you stay within your means, and you work towards a more independent financial future. Do you know why I'm starting this video with this 2000 Silver Eagle? It says, the dawn of a new millennia. I think this is the perfect opening to this video because I will be talking about money. This Silver Eagle is money. And I'm going to show you why this is not money. And if it wasn't clear, just look at the back. Most people don't think about money. They may stress over it, they may fear it, they may hate it, or they may love it, chase it, and hope for it. But no one really understands what money is. Most people think, this is money. And most people think, this is worth money. But not only is that incorrect, it is conversely true. I'm going to teach you how money was created and how it can help or hurt humanity, and why this is falling away, and why this is coming into our reality now. In order to understand money, I need to take you back when the need arose for it. For most of human history, we hunted and gathered, meaning there was no economy. You only had things or you died. But today, we have specialization, financial activities, different resources, different skills, different industries. So how did this rise? Well, in between, there was another realm, if you will, or purgatory, where there was some level of financial wealth, but there wasn't a full economy. Back in these days, we bartered. Bartering is when two parties want to trade things of equal or semi-equal value, such that they agree, with each other to get the other thing. This only works if they agree on the value of each thing. Let me give you an example. Take a rancher and a farmer. The farmer wants to trade some amount of crop to the rancher for the cow. But there's only one cow and there's a number of crops. So how many is worth each other? What is the equal value of these resources? Without money, there is no dollar amounts or gold amounts or ounces amounts or grain amounts. There is only agreed upon values. Assuming everyone agrees, or the two parties agree, or one has a big enough sword, they go ahead and say 1 unit of cow is worth some amount of units of crop, and the transaction will happen. However, what if the rancher doesn't want to sell the cow at this moment? Or they don't want to sell the cow for a month or 2 months of food? Or perhaps they want to sell it for a service. How do you value all of that? Well, this is why money was created. So this is where the need for money arose. But what is money? Well, money is simply a store of value that you barter with. So the reason a crop or cattle is not a store of value is they deteriorate. The farmer cannot simply hold their crop years on end. It would just spoil and rot and become worthless. And the cattle is not immune either. While it may last longer, it ages or it needs food. It cannot just exist and maintain value. So this is why money was created and where money came from. Something that can maintain its value that everyone understands, mainly gold and silver, but some types of seeds or alcohols or shells or stones or mosaics or anything that lasts long enough that everyone agrees has value is money. It doesn't necessarily need to have a utilitarian value, but it needs to be scarce, it needs to be tradable, and it needs to be somewhat convenient. So going back to the farmer, what did money allow? Well, it allowed them to go ahead and say, I'll sell my crops, I'll receive some amount of money, depending whatever the local system used, and I can save that money. And, I need to go buy a cow for my food. I'll go ahead and take my money and trade it for the cow or exchange it for the cow. But this can also allow you to say, okay, I don't need a full cow. I'm going to pay this guy, known as a butcher, and I'll get a nice piece of the cow for a slight premium, but I don't need to buy the whole cow and do all this stuff myself and free up all this over time for me to go farming. Or, here's another example. And this is really how capital investment created humanity's boom. Let's say the farmer wants to buy a cart, and the cart will greatly help them with their fields. Let's say it boosts their overall output in a certain amount of time by a somewhat substantial margin. Well, normally, if there was no money, they wouldn't be able to make enough crop to go barter for the cart. Remember, labor in those days was a lot more limited, so something like a cart would be extremely expensive. So they can't physically save up enough crop to go trade for a cart, even if the other person was willing to accept that much crop. But with money, what they can do is they can sell all their crops, keep a little bit each season, and then pool it together and buy the cart. And what that enabled is they bought it after a few seasons, and their agricultural output increased. And now they're making more money, not only for themselves, but there's more food, which means the society benefited overall. This is why money is so important. It enables quicker trade, more effective exchanges, and all other financial activities, which really exponentially expanded humanity's, I suppose you could say, economic potential or economic output. That's why money is important, i.e., a store of value. Now that you know what money is, we need to talk about currency. So let's break that down. Currency, like water. That's where the word liquid asset comes from. Currency is something that is easily exchangeable or quickly exchangeable. It needs to be, I go to the store and just hand you it and boom, quickly. This is money. I can't take this to the store, even if they understood its value. What are they going to do? Cut it or file it or have little bits for me? It's just not feasible. What if you want to buy something online or trade stocks? Or what if you're like Warren Buffett trying to buy a railway he did a few years ago that for $30 billion, that's, a billion ounces of silver. That's not something you can just magically transport, It's possible, but it's not feasible. So currency does not need to be money. It could be backed by money and give it value. Now this is a fiat currency, meaning it is not backed by anything. And I'll go into why this old style, or this is technically new style, for most of human history, currency was backed by money. But this new fiat money is rapidly falling away, and why new money for the new world will be backed by things of real value. So why do I think the US dollar is losing value? Well, it all comes down to what a currency is for. Buying things for you. As much as this money really has value, I can't eat it. Or I shouldn't eat it. I can't use it as a tool. I can't use it as a house. I need to exchange it for something I want. That's ultimately where stores of value get their value. So, world reserve currencies or other popular currencies are known that if you have that currency, you could exchange it for something of value. And because of that, they're sort of self-fulfilling in that everyone thinks they're good and then peg other currencies and resources and things of value to them. And the wider it gets, the more entrenched it is and the more everyone accepts it, and boom, that's how you get a world reserve currency. So looking to the past, there's been a number of world reserve currencies, or at least widely accepted enough to be considered world reserve currencies, that would arise and fall for a number of reasons you'll see pretty quickly. Let me give you a little example of some past currencies. So we have Portugal in the 1400s, which came around because they were a large trading empire. They had colonies in Africa and India and Southeast Asia, and they brought spices all the way from there to Europe. This caused them to be widely accepted because so many intermediaries and traders and all the demand for spices had to be done in their currency, and that's why it ultimately gained such protection. Now, they ultimately lost this to Spain, which gained it for similar reasons, partially because they merged with Portugal, but also because they had a more effective trade network. So Portugal lost it because they became less important than the new competitor, even though they did similar things, which is trading, which you'll see is a common theme here. Speaking of Spain, they got it in the early 1500s and they held it for 110 years, so not bad. After that was the Dutch. The Dutch got it in the early 1600s, and maybe you've heard of this little company called the Dutch East India Company. A little bit of a deal back then. They got it because of trading for the same reasons. They had a vast trade network. They had a monopoly on parts of India, and they brought it over, and that was such high demand, and they had so much interconnectedness with their currency that it just naturally fell into a world reserve status. That lasted 80 years. Again, which you'll see is a pretty common year. After this, the French gained it. Perhaps you remember how powerful France was, all the Napoleonic Wars and whatnot. They also had a pretty extensive trading empire, that strong military to defend that empire, and they were really unchallenged. So because everyone did business along those routes and around France with the French currency, it naturally became a widely accepted currency. After the French was the British, which also had a large trade empire. They rapidly industrialized, so they had the most economic output per person of any country. Not to mention the British owned, about a fifth of the world's population, just a little bit up there, and a fourth of the world's land, if I remember correctly. So they held it for 105 years, and they only lost it to a more effective competitor, the United States. So the United States was a virgin new country, had all this fresh money moving into it. It wasn't debt ridden, and it had a great industrial renaissance, so to speak. I guess it didn't have anything to begin with, but you know. And that all culminated with the US dollar becoming the new top dog, where the United States consumed and created so much wealth that everyone had to be part of the US dollar system in order to partake in it. But you'll notice there's a difference between all these. The country was started off not being known. They created a trade network or something of value, so economic, like an industrial capacity or farmland or resource or whatever, or a combination of all these things really. And then they gained acceptance, which boosted their power. And then they ultimately lost it to not being able to keep up or compete with a new burgeoning power. So this still applies today. As of now, the United States has held the reserve currency status for 96 years. But that is changing because we no longer have our industrial capacity here. We're offshoring our jobs and our technology. Our military is still very strong, but it's bloated and inefficient. So all the things that ultimately created us being the top dog and giving us the world reserve currency has perpetuated it such that we still have it, but we no longer have the fundamentals to back it up. All these weren't like night and day collapses where one just ended and one started. They overlay it a bit. And it's the same thing for the US dollar, and I think we're in the dying days of the US dollar where it doesn't have too many more years of being widely accepted. So it'll ultimately be replaced, or more likely, the world will be fractured into a bunch of different regional groups as things sort of reconstitute from the coming economic difficulties. And that is going to have some profound negative impacts on the United States and its people. Not to mention any financial institutions or whatnot back to the US dollar. So I'll go into that in a moment. So the US dollar was created in the late 1700s for the United States. It was defined as 371.25 grams of silver, and that was also set as a ratio of 15 ounces of silver equal 1 ounce of gold. So $1 equals about 0.77 troy ounces, which is a little more, about 10% more than a normal ounce. And today you may notice that this is not, in fact, worth an ounce of silver. But let me tell you why. So there's two periods to U.S. money. There is the founding to the 1900s period and onwards. If you look from the 1800s to, let's just say, 1900, there is no inflation. There's little bumps in, maybe there was a shortage of a resource or a famine or agricultural blit or whatever. But there was no, we can't afford anything or year-over-year inflation. That just didn't happen because everything was real money. You can create more gold and silver, deflating it, but the population is also increasing and the wealth of the world is increasing, so it all kind of just kept up naturally. But then you look rather suspiciously at the early 1900s, and you see it go from flat to trending upwards. Now, what could that be? Well, on December 23rd, 1913, the Federal Reserve was established. And don't let its name fool you. It is not federal. It is a private bank or a private business owned by banks, which we don't even know who they are, which gained the sole power to create United States currency. So the day after, the Treasury lost the ability, or not specifically the day after, but when that bill was signed, the Treasury lost the ability to create US dollars. And if you look here, it says Federal Reserve Note. So this is not government currency. There's nothing connected, for all of the Eagles and George Washingtons and fancy shenanigans. This is not U.S. currency. This is Federal Reserve currency, which is not federal, but a private institution. So what does that institution want? Well, it wants to make money for it and its cronies. It pays a 6% dividend to the banks. And the banks that established it, or at least, contributed to getting Woodrow Wilson elected, who had already agreed to institute it when he was elected, so I wonder who wanted them to do that, benefit from it, not only by that dividend, but by the money creation debt scheme and control structure it enabled, which I'll explain more in a little bit. So if you look from 1913 to 1970, you'll see a slight, like a curve, like a reasonable inflation. Like you know it's there and you'll expect it, but it's not enough to outpace wage growth. The economy was still growing. We had all these new fronts. Wars were being fought, and it was great. But people caught on. So Vietnam happened, and we were supposed to be creating money equal to the amount of gold we had, and we weren't. That's why the inflation was taking place. So we printed trillions to pay for Vietnam, all these coups, fighting the Soviet Union, World War II, that little small conflict. And people realized. So in the 1970s, everyone realized the United States is not good on its word. There's more dollars than there is gold, and we want our gold back. So the French even sent a warship, and the president said, U.S. dollar, or U.S., give me our gold. Here's our U.S. dollars, they're worthless, just take them. And the U.S. is just like, I'm good. So what did the U.S. do? Well, President Nixon, and this is probably the most important thing of his entire career, said,
I have directed the Secretary of the Treasury to take the action necessary to defend the dollar against the speculators. I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions determined to be in the interest of monetary stability and in the best interest of the United States.
And it was at that moment that the U.S. dollar was doomed. And it's taken a while, and there's been a lot of thumbs pressed on the scale, but that ultimately disconnected any responsibility from the Federal Reserve and the government to maintain purchasing power of the currency. And every country that has ever tried to make fiat currency, i.e. not backed by real money, has always abused the power, and it has always collapsed. So looking forward, what happened? It's incredible. You'd never believe it. Inflation just went like this, or rather, the purchasing power decreased nearly consistently up to the present day, where I can't remember the exact number, but it was something like 70% of U.S. dollars were printed in 2021 or something. The stimulus, which was such a good idea, the peak of their economic management ability. So that's what happened. The Federal Reserve stole the United States currency, and then the United States lost its underlying industrial strength. So we've offshored all of our industry and most of our technology. And while we still create a lot of food and resources, it's not as if we're so far ahead other countries by what we naturally create. We just have a head start. We have our infrastructure and our people and all this wealth, and everyone believes in us. And because we've had reserve currency and some shenanigans with the petrodollar and whatnot, we've been able to maintain it. But we are not the strong country that attracted this. We're basically thieves from the rest of the world who are using this currency as a front and inflating it away to buy our way out of jail, so to speak. So I'll go in more of how the debt structure in the Federal Reserve interacts with the banking system and whatnot, and why there's infinite debt in just a moment. Now that I've established why the US dollar is losing value and is being mismanaged, I need to talk about the consequences of that for the physical economy. So there's the saying, I can't remember exactly how it goes, but it basically says, the problem is not how much money people make, it's how much money they lose. If I hand you a winning lottery ticket, the economy can only be better off. There's more economic output, more creation, more jobs, more technology. There's no downside. But if I hand you some bill, like a parking ticket that you can't afford, what are you going to do? You just spend less money elsewhere. The economy contracts. So debt is like the parking ticket. The more debt you have, the less you can actually do in the economy. And debt is like stealing from the future. You take from the future to get to the now. And when you do that, you ultimately take more value than you really get in the now, which is debt. So there's two kinds of debt, and one that's excellent and one that is not. So excellent debt is debt that creates more economic value than it uses in the future. So that is, think back to the farmer and the cart. They didn't take out debt, so to speak, but let's say they did. They took out debt and they bought the cart. Well, then they increased their economic output, their crop yield, which means they could pay off the debt easily and there's more left over. So the society is better off at large. If everyone did that, which is how we got here, by the way, our economic freedoms we experience today, is we industrialized. There was capital investment into heavy machinery, steel and steam, and timber and railroads, and all those compounded into our modern way of life today. But bad debt is anything that takes more from the future than it brings to the future. So what is bad debt? Well, it's like useless consumer items. So if you have a credit card and you go say, oh, I want to go buy like a jet ski. Okay. Well, while all the wealth is ultimately meant to come back to the consumer, to the people living in society, if you redirect all the wealth into that, you will immediately lose all of your ability to create more, and the next time you want to get something, you'll have less. So you shouldn't. While I'm not saying you can't buy a jet ski, if you buy a jet ski on the money you don't have now, and then you get to the future and you're even more bogged down, why would you do that? It would be better if you put that resources, that money, that time, that energy into creating more money, and then when you get to the future, you don't need debt to get the jet ski, and you have a little extra left over. If everyone did that, or the government did that, or all the businesses did that, we would just have a surging exponential economic output it would be incredible. And that's basically what happened when we had real money backed by gold and silver. But now, everyone has credit cards and, more overpriced mortgages and speculates in the stock market. All of this bogs down the economy. There's a direct inverse correlation between the amount of debt a nation has as a percentage of GDP and GDP growth. And the higher the debt, the slower the GDP growth. Countries with very low debt experience and somewhat strong economic fundamentals can easily experience 5 to 10% yearly GDP growth. And the United States barely cracks 2%, and that's with the massaged government numbers, so I don't think that's even real. Yeah. And most of it's been technology anyway, all the rest is contracted. So ultimately, let's see, where was I going with this? Oh yeah, debt is the number one threat to the society. And by enabling money printing in the Federal Reserve, it has taken any responsibility away from debt. So when there's a limited amount of money, you can only borrow so much before the money supply contracts and money becomes more valuable, and it naturally fills itself out, so to speak. If there's, let's just say, $100 in circulation and it's all backed by let's say an ounce of silver each, and I'm a company and I want to go borrow $10, okay, I can go find it provided it's available, but I can't borrow $110. It just doesn't exist, and the economy couldn't support it, so then you can't go into more debt, basically. But with the Federal Reserve, and they say it's to stabilize banks, but it's basically a Ponzi scheme where they just print money and enable everything, is you can get more and more and more debt without any consequences. But there is consequences. It steals from the future. It reduces your economic capacity, and it burns you down. And every cycle that should clear these things out or let them fail, like recessions or downturns, they just inject money into it and don't let it actually fail. So instead of getting a number of small crashes, even from this fake financial system, what we're gonna have is like a 2008. You think that was bad? That was nothing. They bailed it out. There was no issue. That was pennies. Imagine every financial institution, company, person, and government around the world comes to the day of reckoning where they don't have enough money to pay their debt, and they can't get enough money to pay their debt. Well, then you have two options. You have a force majeure where everything just disappears, or is that the right word? No, never mind. Well, everything just disappears and say, okay, guys, we're sorry, we messed up. All debt is cleared. We have to just restart with something real, and people will learn the lesson. They'll go back to this, and it won't be easy because millions of people will die, and countries will collapse, and food systems and energy systems and technology will be disrupted for decades. Or we could do hyperinflation, where they just print more and more and more and more and more and push the bag off just a little bit further. Sorry about that. Don't know where the footage cut off, but battery or camera overheated. Anyway, I was saying So the second option is we could push the can down the road. We could print more money, keep up our debt scheme, make the debt more and more worthless in the past, and let's just push it off. So anytime you see the debt ceiling discussion, that's what they're doing. And that's what we've been doing for the past, few decades. But I hate to tell you, if we just faced up to our issues back in 1971, it would have been so much easier. But now, it's gone. Imagine you can't get food because there's no way to buy it, or the energy grid shuts down, or there's no water or cheap industrial goods or, computing technology, this whole interconnected supply chain we take for granted. If the economy collapses and what are you gonna do? So we've really shot ourselves in the foot with epic proportions, and what's gonna go down is gonna be something told in the horse stories for thousands of years as why you don't go to fiat and you stay with real money and you stay within your means and you work towards a more independent financial future. So with all that being said, I'm going to tell you a quick little overview of how the infinite debt cycle happens. And so what is this infinite debt cycle that is killing us? Well, as I said, we enable this debt cycle, but how does it really happen? Well, there's a number of mechanisms in this, and it all comes down to the person. So take a person. This is called, I guess you could say the issue comes from short-term gratification. If you want something now and you can't wait for it, then you'll take out debt. And in the yield days, that wasn't an option. You could only get what you bought. And getting money was a lot more challenging. You had to go physically work in the fields or make tools or work in the coal mines or whatnot. There's no supermarket jobs or business consultants or, gender studies education courses. It's like real work. Money doesn't grow on trees, to quote that saying. And when you want debt, you can take it out. So where does all that money come from? So there's consumer debt, there's business debt, and there's government debt. And then there is financial debt. And all the other ones don't even matter in comparison, but they're all connected. So I'll do financial debt first. So let's go back to the Federal Reserve. It has a infinite money capacity, but it kind of doesn't exist. So they have to go through this money laundering scheme, is all I can describe it as, to get that infinite money into real circulating currency or digital currency. There's really no physical currency as percentage. So they do this silly shenanigans with the government, where the government, a politician will get elected who offers more free stuff to the citizens, more stealing from the future. And then they say, oops, we don't have enough money to pay for it. We need to go into deficit spending. So they tell the Treasury, I need another $1 trillion for my next 4 years. Make it happen. And the Treasury's like, okay, let's issue some more bonds, more treasuries. And then that is just an IOU or debt saying we will pay you back whatever you loan us with interest over a time frame, usually 6 months, a year, 3 years, 10 years, or 30 years. And usually it's far below far below inflation. So it's a scam going into the gate, but and then they sell those to banks or primary banks, and then they sell from there. So the banks buy it with money they have deposited in their own money. And then some of it makes its way to the open market, some of it makes the people, some of it makes the businesses, but most of it goes to the Federal Reserve, where the banks sell it to the Federal Reserve for that infinite money book that they have. And basically this is money laundering because the Federal Reserve converts nothing into money when they trade the Treasury, into money. So the bank walks off with the real money, and the Federal Reserve stashes that new bond in their safe, so to speak. And now the government is paying to the Federal Reserve all the interest and principal, if they ever pay it off, which they won't, of that debt. So that is how money is created, and that's why there is inflation. But that is not the main reason or cause of most money creation. It's only the new source. Most money creation is after that. So there's all this extra money floating around in the banking system, and it goes out and gets deposited, and people get paid, and businesses invest in the stock market, and it ultimately ends up in the hands of people. And then what do people do? Well, unless you're me and you sleep on cash, relatively speaking, or metaphorically speaking, or silver rather, you deposit into a bank. That way you can use it anywhere. And banks pay interest and use fractional reserve banking. So if you deposit $100 at a bank, then you think, you just checked your account, I have $100 in the bank. You poor fool. The second you gave that bank your money, it became their money. It's not your money. You may have rights to $100, but that you don't just have $100. That's not in a vault. The banks lend out that money. And some degree of that is okay, and that would be good for the good debt. But they do it beyond reasonable limits. So good reserve requirements would be like, okay, keep 10% of my money. And that way, if a few people want to come back together, they can get their money and the whole thing trembles along all right. But some banks, they'll have 5% reserve requirements or 3% reserve requirements or no percent reserve requirements, where you can have $100 in the bank and there might just be a few pennies to a few dollars for each person. And that's how a bank run happens, is too many people want money at the same time and there's not enough money. So where does all the other money go? Well, they lend it out or they invest it. And that money, let's say you lend it out to someone to buy the jet ski, like I said earlier, so bad debt, something pointless, and they buy it, and so they took out a loan and they owe that back to the bank with interest. And the bank also owes the person who originally deposited interest, but I'll get back to that. And now the company who sold the jet ski, they have this extra $90-something from the loan, and they say, okay, we need to go deposit that into our bank. And that bank takes the $90, and then they lend out everything but 10% or 5% or whatever. And it's another, like $80-something or, whatever. And that continues. So you can turn $100 into over $1,000, and it's exponential, but it's exponentially decreasing each time because the amounts get less and less. But over $1,000, all secured by only $100. Sounds legit. And if there's enough reserve requirements and the economy is doing well and expanding, that's okay. But ultimately, what this does is create a massive money multiplier. So when the Fed creates new money, it doesn't just create $1 trillion. It might create $10 trillion ultimately when it gets fully circulated, or $100 trillion, And it's all not real digital dollars, but they still count as money. It's perceived money. It doesn't really exist. But all that money, do you know what does exist on it? It's all debt. So the people who take out loans, they owe debt to the bank. The bank technically owns a debt to you. And you probably own a debt to other loans you have. So what does it all do? It accrues interest. So you have $100 real accruing $1,000 of interest. Now riddle me this. If you have, let's just say there's $100 in the whole world, and you get $1,000 of interest. So let's say it's just 1%. That's $10 of interest. At the next cycle you have to pay, you have $100, and assume you can get it, plus $10. Now you may notice an issue where there's only $100. Where's the other $10 come from? Well, the Federal Reserve, of course. That new money injection becomes the interest of the magnified money previously. Now, you may notice an issue here. What happens after that? So you pay that interest off for that cycle. Well, now the total money supply is $110. So the next time interest is due, you owe, what is this, like 100, so number 10 plus 10, so $111 on top. You see the issue here? So every time you need to print more money to pay the previous interest on the debt. And that interest causes the debt to get larger because the money supply gets larger, which means the next time will be even larger. So what does this do? It means that the economy will always have a larger debt than there is physical money. And if the money supply ever contracts such that parts cannot pay, that growing infinite interest rate or interest payment, the whole thing is going to blow up. So I hope you can see that's just a Ponzi scheme. It's money laundering, Ponzi scheme. It's basically fraud. It's not even that well contrived, but it's absolutely diabolical. And the only thing backing it up is that everyone believes in the currency. They're willing to trade their time, their effort, their skill, their entire life, or their kidneys, who knows, for that currency, and that ultimately backs it up. And it's slow enough that people don't realize over the course of a lifetime. But you can go from your grandpa paying, 20 cents or 30 cents for a gallon of gasoline to paying $5 or $6 if you're in California. Absolutely diabolical. So I hope I've explained this well, that you can go ahead and see that that's not a normal thing. The more debt you have, the worse your future situation is. It reduces your economic capacity. It's not good debt. It's a house of cards. There is simply no way we can get out of this. And I used to preach the government should balance the books. If it balances the books and doesn't borrow money, the whole economy collapses. If the Fed stops doing it, the whole economy collapses. If the banks have issues or liquidity crises, or there's another great financial crisis that they can't print out of existence, it's gone. Everything's gone. And you may notice, if you look at the graph from earlier, the purchasing power one, there's a little spike in power during the Great Recession. You know why that was? Because all the banks collapsed and there was no money. So the remaining money, the fiscal currency money, actually increased in value. And since something like 99.9% of all money is digital between all the banks, and they'll all just vanish, well, that's interesting. Not that this will have value for very long after. People will be so fed up with all the lies of the system. They'll be like, they'll work their entire life and carefully save or not save or be real in debt or whatever, and then they'll wake up one day and it'll all just be gone, and it'll be like, what was I doing? Because if you're chasing money and you have no life purpose or passion, that's going to be a rude awakening. I think that pretty much concludes this conversation. All right, so I'll go ahead and round this out. It's probably up to a 20-something minute video, and as much as I think I'm entertaining, I'm only one of the nerds that thinks this stuff is interesting and important. Right now, anyway. But I'll wrap it up with another blow, just to make sure you may think, you know what, the government has smart people. We always pull through this. But it's just not true. The people in the government now never existed in any real financial activity. Like, anyone born may barely remember gold-backed money, and if they did, it was in the final days of it, and they never really experienced what real money is. And a consequence of that is they didn't experience what made the money, or what a good economy looks like, or how to do it. So the current ruling class, and bankers and politicians and insiders, basically skill set and belief is just print more money. And it's worked up to this point because how the system is structured, but it's not a good way to create a free market that really increases the wealth of the world. I haven't even talked about the derivative bomb. There's trillions of dollars in derivatives that are even just more than we can pay or whatnot. But the government's best approach is print money. And then when you ask them about economic policy, you get, there's inflation, price controls. Oh my God, price controls? Come on. Do you know what a free market economy is? Ask Russia how price controls went with communism, and you may notice by the missing millions of Russian citizens who starved, it didn't go well. Price controls don't work. So that if I could find the clip, there's this guy who doesn't even know what treasuries are, that the government borrows money that was part of Biden's cabinet, or there's no understanding of how money influences people's behavior, and how you can go ahead and encourage good debt and economic development. If they could do that, even with this system rotting against us, there might just be hope. If they backed it by real wealth quickly, they quickly change things, they restabilize markets, they bring back investment, They bring back, motivation to work and passion for the nation. But you need to have the most qualified leaders, most visionary, most understanding people at the top, and they need absolute power for a decade or something to fix it. And the people at the top, they don't even know that it's broken. They don't know what the economy is. So it's something I've seen it described as a ship of monkeys. It's like when the wind was going in the right direction, the monkeys thought they were sailing the ship. But now that the wind is starting to change and there's rocks ahead, they tried to turn the lever, the print money lever, or to start a war, or use the media. But what's going to happen is they're going to crash into the rocks. So I think this is all. I hope you've enjoyed my first quality production. And I'd strongly urge you to take this information wisely. And I'll make a Why Silver is Undervalued video at some point, but there's a lot of people on YouTube. Get real money, real currency. Protect yourself with food, water, weapons, anything you need for a few months without a financial system. And the next part of the next video I'll make will be on the alternatives to money. So gold, silver, cryptocurrencies, land, food, whatever. And I'll tell you, what makes good money or bad money, how you use it and its drawbacks. And then the next part after that will be what I think will be the ideal ultimate implementation of money and currency and my take on it. So if you've enjoyed this and learned anything, I know it's a bit repetitive for people who already know this stuff, but I've done my best to make it digestible, interesting, and not fear-based, but antagonizing enough to motivate action. I would appreciate if you share this around or give me some support or feedback. Of course, I haven't edited it yet, so I have to figure that out, but we'll see how it goes. So I appreciate your time, and I hope you the best, and hopefully humanity evolves for the better.